All right, guys, today we're going to talk about a topic that is not spoken about very often in the store, but it's time to have a conversation about it, and that is the big, long crawler style worm. Now, this is a trend that is super popular in Japan, probably one of the most popular bait styles that we see every time we walk into a tackle store and look at boats that guys are using in Japan, but it's not one that's really catching on here in the US sales wise. Now, when I look at my staff and I see what everybody's buying, what everybody's using, what everybody's catching fish on, this is the style of worm that pretty much everybody here uses. But when I see the sales nationwide not kind of mirroring what we're doing, it lets me think that maybe there's just some confusion as to how to fish it, how to rig it, and where and when is the best time to throw this style of bait. So today we're just gonna break down the large crawler style worm. We're gonna share a few things that we do in-house that give us a lot of success, and hopefully it will translate and maybe give you guys another tool in your toolbox. So if you'd like to join in the convo, let's do it. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle.
What a stud.
Yeah. Look at that.
That was sick.
Cheers, my friends. Happy Sunday. All right, guys, some breaking news. What's new this week at the Hookup Tackle?
What a beautiful coastline fish.
Look at that.
Look at that gut on that.
That's a nice fish.
All right, welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, a tackle otaku on Instagram, being joined by my buddy Jeffrey the King. We are the Hookup Tackle USA. Jeff, top of the morning to you, sir. All right, so we're going to talk about a topic that we don't really touch base on that often, and that's a big, long crawler style worm. Okay, now, pretty much every store that you go to in Japan, right? This idea of these long, and when I'm talking about a big crawler style, I'm talking like, 8 to 13, 15 inch, right? I'm talking about long. Everybody makes a crawler, right? I mean, you've got Megabass makes a tournament crawler, and Duo makes a wriggle crawler, and tons of American brands make crawler style normal worms for drop shot, Nico rig, that kind of stuff. But what I'm talking about specifically are these really long crawler style worms. And you see pretty much every brand in Japan has a bait like this. Super popular over there. Here in the US, it doesn't quite fully translate the same, right? It seems like once a worm kind of hits 7 inches, it kind of falls off, right? Unless it's like a curly tail worm. Like everybody throws like a 10-inch curly tail worm, right? But when we get into these longer worm styles, I think there's a little bit of confusion as to when to use them, why to use them, how to use them, right? So today we're just gonna kind of talk through the topic. I'm gonna show you guys some riggings, just some really simple ways to rig these, and maybe it's something that you could add to your techniques. It's a really good technique late in the summer, like this time of the year is a perfect time to talk about it, and it will also translate as those fish move shallow, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So, Jeff, I know that you and I have spoken about this guy, right? So let's talk through a few of our favorite baits here real quick. Now, there's a gazillion of options, right? So I just really want to quick touch base on a few that you might want to just keep on the radar, and then we'll talk through riggings, how to fish them, that kind of stuff, okay? So let's start right here. This is the Deps Kincoo 13-inch. Now, this is really the one, Jeff, you've fished this worm. You don't fish a lot of non-swim bait things, right? What was it about this bait that drew you to it?
The size of it
is
actually cool, because I do like big baits overall. Not just big swim baits, but just big baits. So, after seeing Kenta in the shop, and Kenta is like, I just go bigger. So he's throwing the 13-inch Kincoo, he's throwing the bigger bull flat, he's throwing the bigger Sakamata. I'm like, oh, it's taking a normally would be a small lure, making it larger, and it gives a much bigger presence that I think just is a much cooler vibe. It's a lot cooler to fish. I'd rather fish that than a 3-inch or 4-inch worm.
Right. So for you, it has a cool factor.
There's a cool
because
factor.
of the size.
Yes.
Now, if you guys didn't see that interview with Kento, you should go back through our feed and you should check that out. Essentially, to recap what Jeff just said, is, you know, his idea of how to approach certain bodies of water, and it's the same whether he's in a boat or from shore. And he does a lot of his video shooting in Japan from the bank.
Yep.
Right, and he's fishing super highly pressured areas from the bank where there's just, and you and I saw this a couple weeks ago when we were on Biwa.
Yeah.
Right, you get out in the lake and it's pressured.
Yeah.
But you go on the shore and it's
Oh,
like ridiculously pressured.
insane.
Right. So, you know, you might see like 10 or 15 boats out in a structure, but then you look down the next 100 yards of stretch and there's 40 fucking dudes, you know, all throwing good stuff. So it's not like you'd be like, oh, I'll throw good stuff. Like, they all have good stuff, right? So essentially his mindset is when everybody else is throwing a small worm, he wants to throw a big worm. And if everybody else was throwing a big worm, he'd probably throw a small worm, right? But he wants to do the opposite. And in the summertime, when fishing gets tough, it seems like everybody's trend is to go to a little worm, little finesse, whether it's drop shot or little neko rig, something like that. So this could have a good application, okay? So the Deps Kincoo is definitely one that we're talking about. OSP makes some big crawlers. Now they make a Dolive Crawler 9-inch, okay? And they make it in a normal Dolive version where it's gonna be salted, flavored, it's going to be a sinking style, and they also make it in a high buoyancy, so it's going to be a floating version, right? We'll talk about that difference as well. OSP also makes a slim version, and this slim style, and you can see if I hold these up side by side, right, there's a huge difference. In fact, let me just take it out of the package. Let's make this even easier. So here's a normal crawler style. Now, I should note that the inspiration behind these long crawlers can be several different things, right? It could certainly be a worm, right? And we've seen tons of baits that imitate just like an earthworm. It could be an eel. So in Japan, a lot of their waters will have like freshwater eels, so it could be something like that. But no matter what, a worm profile and a worm shape, no matter where you are in the US, has a natural appeal. I mean, it's a profile that's been catching fish literally forever since we've started using it, right? And so even if they're eating shad or crawfish or something like that, a worm profile is always going to be a natural approach. But there you can see the difference between a slim and a thick, okay? And we'll talk about the difference there in a minute as well. Raid makes some great ones as well. This is a new product for them, so this is the Adustraight. So with the Raid, it's going to have little grooves on it, so that you can, you know, use it out of package. It's going to be a 12-inch crawler, or if 12 inches is too big, you can literally just cut it off at that piece there. And you've got a 10-inch, you can cut it off at that piece there. You have an 8-inch, so you can adjust it to the length you need. You can also use, if you're Texas rigging it and the front of the bait tears, you can cut that piece off, and then you have basically a clean front there as well. And then they also make it in a regular, a fat, and that little skinny version. We'll talk about that again. And then Evergreen makes a great one. They make a bow worm, so they have a big 12-inch bow worm. There's an 8.5-inch slim version coming out that the USA released, and Imakatsu, of course, has their eel crawler. This one definitely inspired eel-wise, right? A little bit harder plastic, more of a firm type offering. So let's jump in. There's two different styles here. There's usually a traditional crawler style and a slim crawler style. Now, traditionally, the bigger crawler style is generally used on the bottom. Okay, so usually things like a neko rig, shaky head, free rig, and we're going to walk through some riggings. The slim version can certainly be used that way, but this is a really skinny bait, and the reason why this skinny size is very, very popular over in Japan is because it's so subtle. So when this thing moves, if you shake this thing, there's a lot of plastic moving, right? It's a lot of vibration, it's a lot of bait moving, whether it's, you know, folding or moving. The slim is super subtle, right? So if you just lightly shake it, it's so light of a quiver that it's hard to detect anything wrong with it. So where the slim is super highly effective is gonna be for like sight fishing really wary fish, right? So generally speaking, this is gonna be a super light Neko rig, or even just like a, you know, weighted Wacky or something like that, but something super finessey that you can throw in shallow water where fish might spook normally when you throw something too big. This is something that will allow you to have a little bit more stealth. It has such a light feel that it just feels more natural to those fish. And that's where this is gonna come into play. You could also drop shot it, okay, but you're gonna have to really downsize the hook. So whether you go with the you know, Dolive Crawler Slim or the Raid Adjust Slim, you're gonna wanna use like a size 3, 4, or 5 little tiny drop shot style hook on this, okay? So small, 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 even though it's a 9, 10, 11, 12-inch worm, okay? All right, let's jump into some riggings and break this down for you guys. All right, so let's talk riggings really quick. So what I want to do is I want to share some techniques and riggings that we internally use here that all of us have had a lot of success with. Now in the summertime, when those fish move out onto offshore structure, a big worm like this is a critical piece in a lot of people's arsenal, right? In a lot of our arsenal. And the two main ways that we will fish this is a free rig and a shaky head. Those are the two big main ways that we will throw it, okay? So I wanna talk about that first, and well, let's just start with the free rig because it's something that we talk about a lot here. Now, if you guys are used to free rigging with like a windbuster, an 8-pound line, and a little 3.5-inch Dolive beaver, okay, this is gonna be kind of the opposite of that. This is something that you might wanna try to free rig on casting gear, a little heavier line, because it is a big worm. So if you're, I have the Dolive Crawler here, which is a 9-inch worm. If you're using the Kincoo, it's a 13-inch, right? This worm weighs probably about 5/8 of an ounce, right? So you're gonna, the worm itself is gonna be anywhere from, you know, half to an ounce probably, and then you start adding your free rig weight and your hook, you're gonna probably be over an ounce in your total weight. So that's gonna be a difficult weight for a lot of spinning rods to handle. So you can try it, right? You could try it on your spinning rod, but if it's feeling like you're really overloading it, just switch to casting gear. Throw it on some 12-pound or 14-pound. You could bump up the weight depending. So this is pretty normal for us, right? So this would be the gear that we would use. So we were gonna bump our hook up to a 4 or a 5/0. The Ryugi Infini is a great size, so the 5/0 fits this one great. And then a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce on the weight. 3/8 seems to be a really good universal size because it lets you fish shallow if those fish are tight, and it also lets you fish deep, and it gives you that versatility to where basically anywhere from the bank down to about 40 feet, 3/8 is a very controllable size. If you're fishing much deeper than 40, you're probably gonna need to go to 1/2 or 5/8 of an ounce. But if you're just trying to keep it simple, and I really just want you guys to try it, something like this will happen. So most of you guys probably have 3/8 ounce weights in your arsenal. So just throw it on a 4 or 5/0 hook, and there you go. You've got a great way to fish it. Now, the biggest thing on the free rig is, of course, you can just kind of drag it around like a Texas rig. In Japan, they really fish a free rig more like a Texas rig than anything else, right? So it's kind of a technique that's thrown out, it's on the bottom, and it's just kind of drug around, right? And it's used to just be a snagless Texas rig, in essence. Out here, if you're fishing structure that's got, you know, more ledges and distinct kind of drops to it, then don't be afraid to kind of pull that bait up and then drop that rod tip so that the bait comes up, and then when you drop that rod tip, that weight separates, and that worm now has a chance to really kind of have this horizontal fall. And with all these crawlers, they're going to design them to have this really nice thump as they fall. So if you think of it almost like a Senko style thump, it's going to have that great kind of horizontal shimmy as it falls. Some of them will glide, right? So they'll kind of move away from, you know, where the weight is, so it'll give you a chance to kind of really lightly move it back to the weight. Lots of things you can do with it on the free rig, okay? Now, if you want to shaky head it, and this is another great way, I know a lot of you guys in the South, you love throwing the shaky head worm. This is basically the shaky head that I would recommend. Now, this is the Owner Shaky Football Magnum. This is the one that most of us use. We like that football style because if we're throwing it on deep structure, it comes through rocks really easy. The 8/0 is kind of the magic size for this like 9 to 10 inch crawler size. Go to the 9/0 hook if you're going to like the 12 or 13 inch size. It'll just set that hook back a little bit. But here, I'll rig one up for you guys just so you can see it. Shaky head is just a super easy way to do it. Now, this is where, if you guys are throwing it on a free rig, I would probably recommend going just straight Dolive Crawler, okay? Because it's gonna give you that salt and that scent, and as it separates from the bait, it's gonna give you enough weight to really kind of just shimmy itself down to the bottom, and it'll kind of keep that bottom contact. Now, if you're fishing it very quick on the shaky head, you can do the same, but if you wanna fish it slower, maybe try going with the floating version, okay? And what the floating version will do is it will allow that tail to kind of lift off the bottom and just give you a little bit of different buoyancy, okay? So let me just rig one up for you. I want you to see how that 8/0 sits on there perfect. Okay, that's it. All right, so nice and simple. Now what I'll usually do is I'll usually run that hook all the way through the worm once just to kind of create a flow through cavity, right? And then just back in there. So that's it, very simple. You've got this nice worm now that as you move it along the bottom, it's gonna have this bottom contact. As you pause it, that tail is just gonna give you a little bit of buoyancy down there, so you can shake it. It's gonna have just a little bit of lift to create a little bit of extra action, okay? So that would be the easiest 2 ways to go about it. Now, let's talk about another way, and that's the Neko rig. Okay, so the Neko rig is probably the most popular way, I would say, in Japan that they fish this. A super easy way to do it. We're going to talk about the rigging. We're going to talk about how to work the bait. Okay, so the Neko rig, you essentially need 3 things. You need a hook, we need a nail weight, and we need some kind of sleeve for the bait. Okay, now you don't technically need the sleeve, but you're going to lose a lot of worms if you don't throw some kind of sleeve. So this could be an O-ring, it can be a tube, it can be whatever it is that you guys like to use. Now, I always get the question, what size do I use? So if this is a category that you're gonna wanna play in, you're more than likely gonna wanna be in like a size 7 or 8 for most of these, because they're relatively thick worms, okay? If you start playing in that thin crawler, you're probably gonna want a 4 or 5, okay? So you're just gonna have to play and see, and it basically is gonna come down to your tolerance of, you know, how tight you like that tube to be, how loose you like that tube to be. For me, if I have to choose, I would rather it be a little looser than a little tighter, because my hook is going to dictate where this tube stays, okay? So in essence, we're just going to put this tube on this worm. I generally like it somewhere right in that kind of front part there, so that you have a little bit of head and a lot of tail. Let me throw this on real quick. So this is the OSP Dolive Crawler again. I had it out, so we're gonna use that as our base here, and that's a size 8 tube. Okay, just to give you an idea. So it fits it perfect. It's not overly snug. It's not really breaking it or anything. And right about there is where I like to keep it. Now, as far as color goes, I don't really care too much about the color. I just picked red so you guys could see it. Okay, so you could do red, you could do clear, you could do black, you could, you know, mix and match the colors if you want, but I want you to be able to see it. So from there, you're gonna need a nail weight. Okay, so whatever nail weight you guys like is fine. You can adjust the weight of the nail based on the sink rate that you need out of the worm. So I like these Ryugi adjust nails because again, it's a tungsten nail, but it has these little grooves in it that you can break off to make lighter or heavier. But if you need a heavier weight, Zappu makes a great one. There's lots of good tungsten nail weights that go up in size in different weights. So if you're going to throw this thing into 25, 30 feet, you're probably going to want to go a little heavier than lighter. But this is also a technique that you can pitch right up on the bank. So feel free to skip it under a dock. You could pitch it up on like a break wall. You could fish it around grass beds. Lots of shallow ways you can use this as well. All right, then you're going to need a hook. Now for me, I'm making a mess over here already, Jeff. I like these 2 hooks. Okay, so I've talked about this one a lot. This is from Owner. It's the Sniper Finesse hook. This is a style hook that I've used for a long time that I have a lot of confidence in. But you could use something like a Talisman hook from Ryugi. It's got a little bit of a weed guard in there. Imakatsu makes a good one. So whatever brand you like, there are good hooks in there. I'm just going to throw it on this. This is the hook that I've always used. And again, you could use a weed guard or a non-weed guard version. I don't really care as much about the weed guard on this. It's just more personal preference. So Here's the front, that's the weight. Okay, there's the tail. When we're rigging this, okay, I like to go like this. Okay, and you're gonna probably want to use a 1/0 or a 2/0 size here on your hook. So this is a 1/0, just so you can see how it is. You could easily get away with a 2/0 if you wanted to. But this is how your hook should sit on your Neko rig, so that when the weight's on the bottom, right, and you're pulling it in a way to where that hook is set up correctly. Okay, so if a fish gets it, your hook is in an upright position, you can drive that hook through. Now, big thing when fishing the Neko rig, the longer the worm, the more movement potentially it can have, okay, which can be a good thing or it can be a challenging thing for you guys. So remember, especially in the summertime, a lot of these fish are super lethargic, okay? So that water gets really hot. They kind of feel like us, just super gross, right? You walk outside and you're like, oh, it's so hot. You just want to kind of sit on your couch and sit on the AC and you don't want to be messed with. Bass kind of feel that same way. So if you throw this giant worm down there and they're looking at it and you're just shaking the shit out of your rod, kind of like what we talk about in drop shot, where you're kind of causing a seizure down there, and this worm is just like collapsing and folding. If you shake this worm really hard, it's going to have this crazy, almost like clammy type motion where it's just folding and folding and folding and folding. That's a lot sometimes for fish. Now, sometimes that could be the trigger. If they're really aggressive and you're trying to make a big statement, then shake your rod a lot. But what I've learned by fishing with people that are amazing at the big worm is that less is more here. So there's a lot of plastic. So if you do absolutely nothing, right, no rod movement of any kind, just the current and the pulse of the water underneath is going to give the bait a little bit of life, right? The reason why they have all these grooves and the different shaped tails and the different thicknesses is they're trying to get the worm to just grab a hold of any kind of movement or current in the water, so it gives the worm just a little bit of pulse, right? That's gonna be much more lifelike than you sitting there, you know, shaking this thing and it's just going crazy and dancing underwater, okay? So typically you'd throw it down, you'd let it sink, you'd pick it up, you'd maybe just give it a small little shake as you move it. And that small little shake will cause it to just kind of have a little bit of a dance, and then just pause it again and let it lay on the bottom. And then tighten your line, give it a little bit of shake, and it's just gonna, you know, cause it to have a little bit of movement and then go down. That little bit of movement is just putting out little pulses, nice and natural, right? So a big bait that's moving very natural, that's gonna seem much more lifelike than this giant creature down there that's just going freaking crazy that nothing in nature actually looks like. Okay, so there you go. There is your Neko rig. Now, you could also do this unweighted. Okay, so if you wanted to use like the super floater or, you know, the high float version, whether it's the Eel Crawler, the Dolive Crawler, any of that, you could do it without that nail weight. And if you were going to do that, then what I would recommend is I would recommend putting the hook through the sleeve, okay, like this. Okay, so now you have it sideways, and as you twitch on the surface, it's going to move this way, okay? And that way, when the fish bites, that hook is again in the upright position, and you can notch it in there really good, okay? Another way that you can do this is, instead of Neko rigging, you guys can always just throw like a weighted Wacky. Okay, so this is another very popular way. This is a great one with the slim worm also, because it allows it to pull down and give you a lot of movement. So something like a Zappu Inchi Wacky, this is the power version, so it's got a little stouter hook on it, which I like when throwing the bigger worm, because generally, I don't know why I can't say that word today, we're using heavier line, right? So this could be a great option as well. This will let you just kind of pitch toolie lines, little grass patches. And again, you would rig it the same way, just right through that sleeve, and then that weight will kind of pull it down, and that crawler will kind of have a little swim to it as it falls. Super easy, great way to fish it. Now, Jeff, of these riggings, I know just to circle back, I know we were talking about the Kincoo and you fishing it. How were you throwing, or how do you like to throw the big one?
It's just a big Neko.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you pretty much live on the Neko.
The same way that Kento was fishing it, it looks the best that way, I think. It's a really fun bait to fish.
And again, it's 13 inches,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're moving the rod tip, Are you giving it tons of life, or are you letting the worm just kind of do what it does in just little small movements? What's your favorite way to use it?
So the way that I was fishing it when I, caught that fish is I just threw it at a wall, and you basically just let it like crawl slowly off. And the way that Kent had it rigged is he had that decoy screw lock weight. So when it hits the bottom and it like vibrates.
Ah.
And it makes like a clicking noise, so it vibrates, the whole worm shakes, and then it slowly falls back over. Then you lift it up, get it off the ground a little, let it fall back down, then and then it slowly
falls
back
over. Yeah.
And then they pick it up.
So less is more.
Less is more,
Yeah.
for sure. You don't want it. I mean, when you do pull it through the water and it's doing that weird like flapping dancing,
right? That
thing,
little sea thing that it does.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, it looks crazy.
You're like,
right?
okay, that's not.
So there's a lot of times if you're using a real small little worm, sometimes you have to kind of impart a bunch of action because the worm's so small that you need to kind of keep shaking your rod so that bait quivers or moves or does whatever it's supposed to do.
Yep.
If you're not used to throwing a big worm, a lot of times you just do the same thing because that's what you've always done, but you do that same movement
Oh my gosh.
on a big worm, and that thing's
Looks
just
ridiculous.
Dude, it's just going crazy down there, right? So the fish are laughing at you,
Yes.
basically. So what Jeff's referring to is instead of inserting like a nail weight in the front, there are different weights. Decoy makes a great one. There's several available. They're basically just a twist lock weight, right? So you can just twist it on the front and then the weight will be external. A little heavier, and then as it lands, it just kind of creates that little kind of shake, boom, like that, and the worm lays down. So again, nice and simple, okay? All right, guys, so that is a wrap for us. We didn't really talk about rods and stuff, but the same rod that you would throw your traditional Texas rig stuff is the right answer for this. So if you guys really want to throw it on a spinning rod, something in a medium heavy to heavy would be good. But traditionally, I'm throwing this on like my medium heavy plus to heavy. So something like an FMJ or 893, 894, something like that, an NRX, something just in that main jig and worm power and taper would be perfect. So I hope that helps. Maybe it gives you a little insight on some very simple ways to throw this. If you guys have questions, or if you've figured out other ways that I didn't talk about that have really been good for you, please drop it down below. I'd love to share so collectively we can all become great big crawler fishermen. Jeff will leave links to the products if you guys want to check any of them out closer. And until next time, guys, thank you for your support. Thank you for your business. Go out and try it. Go catch some big ones. Make sure to tag us. I'd love to see your success. But please, holler at me anytime if you have questions. We'll see you again soon. Peace.